Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to Pre-Show for Monster Monday. My name is DM Gallibond, and tonight on Monster Monday, we're going to be looking at frost giants. So get your questions ready about frost giants and those monsters and all that kind of good stuff. In the meantime, want to let you know, as usual, the music you're hearing is from the desktop application Sirenscape. And Sirenscape is a great little application. You can put all kinds of incidental music, sound effects, everything for all of your tabletop RPGs, fantasy, sci-fi, whatever milieu of RPGs you like to play. And it's able to be integrated with Discord, so you can pipe it through very easily without a whole bunch of extra software, so that you can hear it, your stream can hear it, and your players can hear it. Very simple, very easy. That's why I like it. Also, remember, go check out Mo over at the tabletopbellhop.com. Mo is the OG when it comes to all things tabletop games. Card games, board games, party games, TTRPGs, you name it. If you can play it on a tabletop, Mo has tons of information about it. All kinds of resources and a whole galaxy, links to a whole galaxy of people doing media about tabletop games, from developers to podcasters to everybody in between. Alright, and that is that. Alright, so we will be going live in about a minute. I'm just trying to get this monitor set up here. Alright, there we go. Hope everybody has had a good Monday. Alright, and I'm going to go over and switch this camera angle on over here. And I'm going to bring the music down, 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 just to the edge of hearing. And all right, welcome everybody to Monster Monday. My name is DM Gallibond, and this is Monster Monday for Monday the 6th of December 2021. And tonight we are going to be looking at a monster that goes all the way back to the very, very, very beginning of D&D. And that monster is the frost giant. Frost giants have been around for a long time, and they're just kind of a fun monster to have in D&D. Giants are, they're just kind of fun, and not so complicated as some other monsters that are fun to have. And it's just a good thing to throw at a party on the spur of the moment and have a good old knockdown drag out fight on your hands. Alright, so let's take a look at specifically the frost giant. They've been pretty consistently described throughout the editions, and going back to where we get our first description, which is in basic D&D, these awesome giants have pale skin and light yellow or light blue hair. They stand 18 feet tall, have long full beards, and wear fur skins and iron armor. Which, seeing as how they live way up in the frigid Arctic areas, iron armor, whew, that must get pretty cold. Alright, and then when we go from Basic Edition over to AD&D or First Edition, we learn that frost giants have dead white or ivory skin color, blue-white or yellow hair and pale blue or yellow eyes. Their build is basically similar to a muscular human with appropriate size differences. Frost giants wear armor and bare skin and bare arms similar to those of humans of the northern barbarian sort. And then in 2nd edition, we learn a little bit more and we get our first difference in opinion of the size. So frost giants have muscular, roughly human builds. Typical adult male is 21 feet tall, so they've gotten taller since 1st edition, and weighs about 8,000 pounds. Females are slightly shorter and lighter, but otherwise identical to males. Frost giants have snow white or ivory skin. Their hair is light blue or dirty yellow with matching eyes. Alright, and this image here is the illustration from the 1st edition Monster Manual. That was almost exclusively black and white images, pen and ink drawings of the various different monsters. So that is the rendition of frost giants in that particular source book. Well, now in this slide we see the 2nd edition image of a frost giant. So they upgraded to color images, and now we get a little bit more of a sense of the pale skin and the light yellow hair and those types of things. So lore about these monsters, and whenever we do descriptions, we always do descriptions from the earliest description coming forward. Lore we do from the current edition looking backward, just to try to get details about the monster from as many different editions as possible. So frost giants are creatures of ice and snow with hair and beards of pale white or light blue and flesh as blue as glacial ice. That's what we learn in 5e. Now in 4e, we learn a description not so much of how they look, but how they act. So a frost giant prefers to charge into melee with an icy great axe attack, follows up with chilling strike. It throws an icy hand axe only when it has no other options. And then in 3rd edition, we learn a little bit about their society. Frost giants live in frigid Arctic lands of glaciers and heavy snowfall. They make their lairs in crude castles or frigid caverns, and tribal leaders call themselves Jarl. And any of those of you who have studied anything about Vikings or saw the dramatic series that was on TV, I think it was on History Channel maybe, for a few years on Vikings, their leaders were always called Jarl. So I think that's where they got it. They got it from the ancient Danes, that term of Jarl, which is similar to like an earl or a duke or something like that in other European nobility. Alright, now obviously, no surprise here, the creature type for a frost giant is in fact a giant. And giants tower over humans and their kind. They're human-like in shape, though some have multiple heads, such as Ettins, or deformities, such as Fomorians. 6 varieties of true giant are hill giants, stone giants, frost giants, fire giants, cloud giants, and storm giants. And besides these, creatures such as ogres and trolls are also considered giants. And this is from 3rd edition. And this gives, kind of standing back here, lost in the background, is a human warrior. Human male. So this guy is about 6 feet tall. And then over on the far left of the image, you have a fire giant. So sort of the dark-skinned, fiery-haired giants that are about twice as tall as a human, maybe a little more than twice as tall. Then you have the Frost Giant on the far left, considerably taller, uh, and a human comes up to about a hip on the Frost Giant. But then the Storm Giant is the tallest of the giants, and a human barely comes up to the giant's knee. So it's a very, very large, very large creature indeed. And it kind of gives you that. That was a nice thing about third edition, and we'll see another image a little bit later on, where we have a couple of different comparisons of sizes between the various different races of giants. All right. And now we are going to go take a look at one of everybody's favorite parts of the show, which is where we look at the mechanical changes of the monster throughout the various different editions. And this is a resource that I added to my collection not long ago. I've used it once or twice for creatures that go way, way, way back. Now, this is the very first set of source books for original D&D. And original D&D even predated basic D&D. So this is like the 1974 edition that was published in paperback by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, one of the first things from TSR. And this really was when the game was heavily influenced by the wargaming culture that both Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson had been a part of before they developed the rules for what would become D&D. And it went through an iteration called Chainmail first, and then eventually became Dungeons and Dragons. So here in this book, which is called the Monsters and Treasure book, book 2 of the 3 source books, we get information about the giants. Now, we find out that the Frost Giants have 10+1 hit dice. Their lair is a castle. Their approximate size is 18 feet tall. And unusual characteristics. So they're impervious to cold. And then their damage is 2 dice plus 1 hit damage. 2 dice plus 1. What does this 2 dice plus 1 mean? 2 of what kind of dice? Well, you see, back in this day, the rules were so primitive that the damage of every single monster was a d6. And so it didn't matter what kind of monster you were fighting. If it hit you, it would always do 1 to 6 points of damage. The special thing about this is that a Frost Giant would do 2 of those dice plus an extra point. So it would do a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 13 points. That meant it was really powerful. But then, of course, you see the Fire Giant, a little bit stronger. 2 dice plus 2 hit points of damage. And then the Cloud Giants could do up to 3 hit points of damage, or 3 dice of damage. So up to 3d6, or 18 points of damage. So that kind of gives you an idea that, how giants were special and set apart from other monsters in those early days of the game. Alright, now we go to the basic edition rules, and this is the Rules Cyclopedia, one of the sources that you've seen a lot on this show. Collected rules that cover the entire run of the basic, expert, companion, master, and immortal set of, or tiers of play, as they were called back in those days. And the Frost Giant here has an armor class of 4, 10+1 hit dice, can move 40 feet per round in combat, makes an attack by weapon, and the damage is 4d6 damage. Saves as a 10th level fighter, and chaotic alignment. And again, this is the edition that was so poor, they didn't have a good and evil axis, they only had chaotic, lawful, and neutral alignments. And we learn a little bit, these awesome giants have pale skin, long beards, wear fur skins and iron armor, often build castles above the timberline of snow-capped mountains. And they always have either 3d6 polar bears or 66 wolves as guards. They are not affected by cold-based attacks. Now, also from Basic Edition, this was the other thing that I was talking about. There was a resource called the Bestiary of Dragons and Giants that was published for this edition of the game. And one of the cool things about it, it was a paperback book, and it had a fold-out cardboard cover. And on the inside of that, well, I guess it's actually not cardboard, but cardstock cover. And on the inside of that, there was a size comparison. And you have way over here on the left, you have a human fighter. And each of these squares is supposed to represent about 5 feet of height. And then as you read this across right to left, you have the human giant, and then the hill giant, which is about twice as tall, the stone giant, which is yet taller, and here's our buddy, the frost giant here. Then in that edition of the game, there was something called a mountain giant, which was kind of the bigger cousin of the hill giant, if you will. And there's a cloud giant and the storm giant. Then there was also the sea giant, which was yet another variety of giant back in those days, and the fire giant. And then also on this cover, you have the size of the dragon. So you got the green dragon, the black dragon, the gold dragon, white dragon, red dragon, and blue dragon. And notice that the gold dragon is the only metallic dragon that's listed. And for a long time, officially, there were only gold dragons and then the other chromatic colors. It took until, I think, into Advanced D&D before they came up with the whole spectrum of metallic dragons to go along with the gold dragon. So that's just a pretty cool, like, little graphic size chart thing from that edition. And now we're into first edition AD&D, and we have the frost giant. A lot of the stuff stays the same. Still armor class of 4, 10 hit dice, 4d6 damage. Well, now they can hurl rocks for 2d10 damage, and they're impervious to cold. They are chaotic evil, and they hurl rocks anywhere from 10 to 200 feet, inflicting 2d10 damage. They can catch like missiles 40% of the time, and they resist all kinds of cold attacks, including white dragon breath. So they cannot be hurt by any kind of cold attack, even magical cold attacks. Alright, so Frost Giant in 2nd edition. Now we finally have an improved armor class. Instead of armor class 4, the Frost Giant now has an armor class of 0. Still the same movement. Now they've also gotten a little bit beefier. They're 14 hit dice. They require either a 5 or a 7 to hit an armor class of 0, which was kind of the gold standard back in those days. Still can hurl a rock. Damage per attack is by weapon. 1d8 with their fist, or with a weapon, usually 2d8 plus an additional 9 hit points. And then the Frost Giant's natural armor class is 5. The warriors usually wear chainmail, metal helmets, carry their belongings in huge sacks, and it gives information on what you find in their sacks. They're immune to cold, can hurl rocks for up to 200 yards. And warriors favor huge battle axes. Frost giants live in small bands consisting of a chief, henchman, and the camp followers. And they'll usually occupy a crude castle or frigid cavern. And then it talks about what kinds of creatures you'll find in the lair. Then there's also sort of a social makeup of a group. 20% chance that any group of frost giants will have a shaman or a witch doctor. And if the group is led by a jarl, there's an 80% chance of a spellcaster. And the shamans are priests up to 7th level. Witch doctors are priest wizards up to 7th and 3rd level. Frost giants often capture and tame other creatures as guards. 50% chance there will be winter wolves, larger than normal groups. Check for every 8 guards. Bands with 20 or more have an additional 30% chance to have yeti in their lair. Larger groups, check for every 16 yards. Jarl's band, 20% chance to have 1 or 2 subdued white dragons, in addition to other guards. Dragons will be age category 2 to 5. They also take captives hold for ransom or use as slaves. So it gives you a little bit of an idea of how they live and the things that they like to do. Now, in 3rd edition, we have 2 varieties of Frost Giant. We have the Frost Giant and the Frost Giant Jarl. And so the difference is the Jarl has a little bit, has about 100 more hit points than the normal Frost Giant. Has significantly better armor class 29 instead of armor class 21. Is a bit stronger. Has an attack bonus of 33 versus an attack bonus, an attack bonus of 18 versus an attack bonus of 10, and the grapple bonus is 33 instead of 23 for the base giant. The Jarl uses a magical great axe and deals 3d6 plus 18 damage, plus an additional 1d6 cold. Then rock throwing, they're all immune to cold, low light vision, rock catching, vulnerability to fire. Now that's an interesting thing. In 3rd edition, a lot of times monsters were, hey, Curved Earth, welcome, hey, Adamant. Welcome. Alright, the Great Axe. Oh, I'm sorry, that's a... Why does it keep doing that? It keeps going back and showing the old stream instead of this stream. Come on. Stupid thing. Okay, alright. I don't know what is going on with that dumb phone. And yo, welcome, viewers. My Twitch on the phone is being a PITA this evening and not giving me the live stream the way it should. So, alright, getting back to 3rd edition. We have the Frost Giant Jarl has slightly better stats, which makes sense because in the lore of Frost Giants, the thing that they respect the most is strength. And so the people who become the leaders among the Frost Giants, they're the biggest, they're the meanest, they're the strongest, they're the most ill-tempered. They're basically the ones that can beat up and intimidate the other giants. So that would stand to reason why the Frost Giant Jarl has a stat block that's significantly higher than the normal run-of-the-mill frost giant. Right? Then it talks a little bit about their organization. They usually start combat at a distance, throwing rocks till they run out of ammunition or the opponent closes. Then they wade in with their enormous battle axes. They live in frigid lands. They like to take captives. And then 3rd edition always had things about practically every monster that had any kind of intelligence, whether it walked on 2 legs or not. There was almost always a way of doing a template to turn them into characters. Now, obviously with the size of a giant and the number of hit dice of a giant, you're not going to ever be allowed to have a 1st level giant character. Those are always going to be very, very high. In this case, frost giant characters would, let's see, I think they have to start like at level 9. I don't think you can have a frost giant character that's lower than level 9. Just because of all of the abilities and the increased hit points and attack bonuses and everything that you get from being a giant. So the Frost Giant Jarl has some supernatural and quasi-magical abilities. Radiates an aura of evil, has a malignant aura, can command and rebuke undead as a 6th level cleric. It has a dark blessing, and it has some spells. They also use poison, and they smite good. And they have sort of their attack regimen, where they use the Great Club and the Rock Attack. And then let's see. Yeah, okay. Alright, so that is the Frost Giant in 3rd edition. Then also in 3rd edition, we learn something about the giant deities. There is a book, a source book from 1st edition. It's actually a 2-part codex. It's called the Fiendish Codex. And Fiendish Codex Book 1 is subtitled Hordes of the Abyss. So these are all of the demonic powers that you will find in the Abyss. And one of these demonic powers is called Kostchtchie. I guess that's how you pronounce it. I'm not really sure how you're supposed to know it. Kostchtchie, I guess. And his title is the Prince of Wrath. And he is a chaotic evil outsider. He's got an armor class of 41, 425 hit points. And what he is he is the fiendish patron of frost giants. And he looks like an enormous deformed giant clad in hide armor. And he is the lord of the frozen 23rd layer of the abyss. So he's immune to cold damage, but is vulnerable to fire damage. And he's a formidable combatant, even more so when he calls upon the primal frenzy of the Berserker's rage. His weapon of choice is an enormous, blisteringly cold iron maul. And blows from Kostchtchie's attacks are so powerful they can stun those struck when he lands a particularly solid hit. So he's able to hurl rocks of 60 to 80 pounds and up to 5 range increments of 140 feet. So his short range with throwing a 60 to 80 pound rock is 140 feet. His long range is 5 times that. So 200, so 700 feet he can throw a rock. And it weighs 60 pounds. Yeah, you want to be very, very, very far away from him if he gets mad at you. Stunning blow. Every time he critically hits, you have to make a DC 36 Fortitude save, or DC 39 when he's raging. and he can automatically summon different demons. And then they talk a little bit about his strategy and tactics. Now, we're not going to talk too much about him, but I think it's interesting that in 3rd edition, we get information on the various different lords of the giants. Because for anyone who is familiar with 5th edition and who has done much with Storm King's Thunder, there's a reference to the All-Father, or the Lord of all giants that the Storm Giants venerate. And then it kind of gives passing reference to the minor gods that the other giants venerate, but it doesn't really go into a lot of that. Well, if you go back to 3rd edition, you can find source books where they are completely fleshed out and you get all the kind of lore that you want. Why do I show you this? It's because you may want to, in your game, you may want to go and create a, have giants as one of your major enemies, and you might really want to have the backstory of the giant's religion and the giant deities being an important part of that. And so you, of course, your table, you can make it all up on your own if you want to do that. But if you want to have your lore at least somewhat based in official D&D lore, you can go back to some of the old editions and you can find all of these source books that give you this particular information. Alright, and now we come to 4th edition, and 4th edition, of course, as everybody who's familiar with this series knows, we always talk about how 4th edition almost is a completely separate game from all of the other editions of D&D, because the mechanics work so different. But we have 3 different flavors of Frost Giant in that particular resource. So we have the Frost Giant, who's a level 17 Brute, armor class 29, 201 hit points. He uses an icy great axe, a dying swipe, and he gets an extra attack when he drops to 0 hit points. A chilling strike, his icy hand axe, and his icebound footing. And then there's 3 different varieties of these guys, and you see them here. We have the Frost Giant Ice Shaper to the left, the Frost Giant Titan in the middle, and the run-of-the-mill Frost Giant over here on the right. So the Frost Giant Ice Shaper is a level 19 controller. Generally means he's a spellcaster. Because in 4th edition, your controllers were typically like your spellcasters. The idea behind them is that they would sort of control the battlefield, if you will. So they've got an armor class 32, 182 hit points, resist 15 cold, freezing flail, a freezing bolt, ice slide, wall of frost that they could put up, ice armor, icebound footing. And then you have the Frost Titan, which is a level 20 elite brute. And so one of their special abilities is Fimble Winter Breath, which is a cold aura. Enemies treat the aura as difficult terrain. Each enemy that starts his turn within the aura takes 5 cold damage. And this guy also has an armor class of 32 and 466 hit points. So they have the Icy Great Axe, the Furious Swipe, Cold-Blooded Kick, Ice Bolts, Blast of Winter, and Glacial Footing. So Frost Giants dwell in glacial caves or crude fortresses carved of stone and ice. From these holds they hunt game and raid for slaves and plunder. Mightiest Frost Giant in a clan called Jarl leads weaker giants to intimidation and violence. And Ice Shapers, who are the Seers, gain respect from their kind for their auguries and wisdom. And a few Frost Giants have magical powers and can use runes, sorcery, and foul rituals. Such powers give a giant great influence in its clan, if not outright leadership. And then they suggest some different encounter groups for parties of a certain level. Alright, and now we get to 5th edition. And unlike some editions, 5th edition actually has the most different varieties of Frost Giant that we have seen in any of the other editions. So the run-of-the-mill Frost Giant has an armor class of 15 and 138 hit points. Swings that Big Great Axe makes 2 attacks with it. Those attacks are at +9 for 3d12 plus 6 damage, or they can throw a rock up to 240 feet for 4d10 plus 6 bludgeoning damage. And then we learn from Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden, we were introduced to the Frost Giant skeleton. So there's a Frost Giant skeleton, an undead version of a Frost Giant. 102 hit points, armor class 14. It hits just as hard as a living Frost Giant, but it has all of the properties of an undead. And it also gets this freezing stare. Targets one creature can see within 60 feet and must succeed on a DC 13 con save or take 35 cold damage and be paralyzed until the end of its next turn. So then we have the Frost Giant Everlasting one. And this monster comes to us out of Volo's Guide to Monsters. And I'm just going to bring this up. This one is really kind of awful. You see, this particular one is multi-headed, and it's kind of weird. You can't really tell whether this is a head that is a trophy or whether this is a head that's actually part of the monster, but it kind of looks like this monster has both male and female heads, which is very strange. So the Everlasting one has an armor class 15, 189 hit points, has an extra head, so 25% chance of having more than one head, and it has advantage on perception checks and saving throws against being blinded, charmed, deafened, frightened, stunned, or knocked unconscious. And this particular Frost Giant regenerates 10 hit points at the start of its turn. It has an ability called Vaprax Rage that recharges after a short or long rest. Can enter a rage at the start of its turn. Rage lasts for 1 minute until the giant is incapacitated. So it has advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws. It makes a melee weapon attack. It gains a +4 bonus to the damage roll and has resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. So basically, it's like a multi-headed giant Frost Giant Berserker, or Barbarian, I should say, in terms of the class. The 5th edition, it's like a Frost Giant with a Barbarian class template on it. The Great Axe is at +11. It deals 3d12 plus 7 slashing damage, or 3d12 plus 11 when raging. And it can throw that same rock for 4d10 plus 7 damage instead of 3d10 plus 7 damage. Alright, and then we also see a Frost Giant Zombie. The Frost Giant Zombie is another variation on the undead Frost Giants. Armor class 15, 138 hit points, has a numbing aura. Any creature starting within 10 feet must make a DC 17 con save. The effect is it can't take more than 1 attack per round or take a bonus action. And it cannot take a bonus action on that turn. So Undead Fortitude, same zombie thing. If you knock it to 0, it gets to make a con save, and if it passes the con save, it falls to 1 hit point instead. Okay, hey Amish, good to see you there. Great Axe, plus 10 to hit for 3d12 plus 6 damage. Hurl Rock for 4d10 plus 6, and the Freezing Stare. So kind of similar to that undead property of the Frost Giant Skeleton. You have to make a con save or you'll take 10d6 cold damage. And then I threw this in here. There is a named Frost Giant in the Storm King's Thunder adventure. And I threw this in here because this ties in with how we might decide we want to use Frost Giants in our campaigns. So his stat block, his physical characteristics are very similar to other Frost Giants. It got a little bit more wisdom than the typical Frost Giant, and he is a spellcaster. So he knows the following ranger spells. So he can do Hunter's Mark and Jump, locate animals or plants, locate object, and water breathing or water walk. So has a bloodstone bolted to a 50-pound iron chain that he wears around his neck. And that is, again, another type of magic item. A Great Axe, he attacks at +9, and a rock he throws at +9 on the attack rolls. And Jarl Storvald, in the story of Storm King's Thunder, he is looking for an ancient artifact, and this artifact is called the Ring of Winter. And this bloodstone is a magic item that is infused with the blood of someone who is known to have been in contact with the with this particular artifact that he's looking for. So this Jarl is expecting this bloodstone to always be telling him what direction and what distance that person is in. And throughout the course of the adventure, the party, of course, has a chance to figure out what they're doing and what they're up to, and can decide to try to intervene if they want to, or just stay out of his way if they don't feel like they're strong enough. So that gives us, some sort of sense of an idea of what they are. And that's the last tab. We're going to get to that a little bit later in our program. So let's go ahead and go back to our slides. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the Frost Giants in encounters. And here is our good friend Kostchtchie, the Frost Giant deity. So Frost Giants in 5th edition are a CR8 monster. So if you have a party of 5 PCs, if those PCs are all level 5, throwing them against a single CR8 monster is a hard encounter. Now if you raise that party to 6th or 7th level, it becomes a medium encounter. And if you want to make it a hard encounter for a 7th level party, you can add 1 ogre to the encounter. So you have a Frost Giant and an ogre together, and that becomes a hard encounter for a 7th level party. And then at 8th through 10th level, that becomes an easy encounter. And if you want to make it a hard encounter for a 10th level party, you can add a Stone Giant to the Frost Giant and make it a hard encounter. Alright, now here's our 4th edition Frost Titan here. And some tactics. If you are a player and you encounter a Frost Giant, what are some tactics you can use? Well, number 1, expect chaos. Frost Giants are raiders by nature. They attack settlements of weaker or smaller races during blizzards, ravaging, destroying, and stealing anything of value. They are brutal and violent, using their superior size and strength to overwhelm, strike fear into, and destroy their enemies. Another thing that you can do if you're fighting against them and you don't want it to end with everybody littering the battlefield dead. Show your strength. The only thing that frost giants respect is brute strength. So don't expect to negotiate or make peace with the frost giant unless you prove you can kill it first. And the way you can prove you can kill it is by knocking it to 0 hit points. And then, choosing, instead of dealing lethal damage, to do subdual damage, and then have it pretty well all bound up and tied up and unable to do anything when it wakes up. Then it's going to say, oh, okay, yeah, you guys are pretty powerful. I'll listen to what you have to say. But that's the only way to get them to listen to you, is to prove you can kick their butt. Now, if you run into a group and you determine that one of that group is a Jarl, if that one of the group is a champion, if you will, of the Frost Giant group, if you go toe-to-toe with that Jarl or that champion and you defeat it, then the others will presume that you can kill them too. Oh, well, he's the biggest and strongest of us. He won his position by kicking all of our butts, and he just got his butt kicked. Okay, maybe we ought to listen to these people. And then another tactic, if the fight goes bad and you're trying to get away and you hope you can escape, drop the booze. Frost giants survive on what they can pillage. They usually make no plans, and their raids into settlements of other creatures are often to gather food and other provisions, especially alcohol. They're very fond of alcohol. So if you have to flee a battle and you have some booze on you, drop that booze and skedaddle. And that just might make them say, ooh, what's that? And they may stop to go pick up the food and pick up the booze, and by the time they remember, oh, hey, yeah, there was somebody we were chasing, you could be long gone. So that's a potential tactic if you have to use the time-honored survival tip of run away. Okay. Now, if you are sitting behind the screen and you want to use Frost Giants as a DM, well, what are some of the tactics in encounters and everything that you might use? Well, they're a great way to add terror to a frozen settlement. So, if you imagine your party's adventuring somewhere and a blizzard blows through, and they're kind of in a small trading town, they're in the only sizable tavern of the type, and this blizzard comes through and everybody hunkers down. Well, what could make that more terrifying than a raiding group of frost giants wading in to the village during the blizzard and starting to attack everything? And the reason they're attacking is they're going after the provisions and the ale that are at the end. So right where your PCs are, these frost giants just start beating the snot out of the building, and maybe taking their big great axes and trying to chop holes in the roof, and then everybody's running around like crazy, and your PCs have to go try to save the day. So most of the time, an attack by frost giants simply means they're hungry, or they're bored, or they're looking for new tools or weapons to scavenge, because they don't make their own stuff. Why make something when you can steal it from somebody else? And yes, that they do steal a lot of the stuff they turn into armor from humanoids, but what they'll do is they'll just sort of take bits and pieces of stuff like maybe shields or things like that, and they will put shields together and turn that into scale mail for themselves. So from time to time, in rare instances, the frost giants may be chasing something, or they might be fleeing from some other horrifying monster of ice and snow, like a white dragon or a remoras. So it could just be that your guys are in this settlement, and just a bunch of frost giants come through yelling and screaming, and they don't even stop to attack. They are just running. Well, buddy, that probably means that something worse than frost giants is right behind them. And so that could be a signal for an even more intense battle that is on the way. And now, in extremely rare cases, such as during the period of shattered ordning recounted in Storm King's Thunder, a powerful frost giant Jarl might organize his followers to quest for some important treasure or goal that goes beyond their immediate needs. It's like I talked about when Jarl Storvald got his frost giants together and started sending them out looking them for this legendary Ring of Winter. And why would he choose to do that at that period of time? Well, the Ordning is sort of the regulating hierarchy of the giants, and because they are physically the largest and the strongest, the storm giants have always kind of been the apex giant in that ordning. But something happened at the beginning of Storm King's Thunder to shatter that ordning, and it basically meant all the giants were trying to figure out which type of giant was going to become the dominant giant. And one of the ways the frost giants thought to do that is, as Jarl Storvald says, well, if I can get my hands on this legendary artifact that is called the Ring of Winter, then maybe I can be at the top of the ordning, and that would move the frost giants up to the top, and everybody else would have to do what we say. So that was kind of the whole conceit behind that, and why they were looking for that. All right, so where and when would you use frost giants in a campaign? So they're a fantastic tier 2 enemy for an adventure arc. You have, if you're adventuring in Arctic areas, you have powerful creatures like the deadly remoras, which is that ice lizard that has the super hot body, the super hot temperature-wise body. The body that if you touch it, you start taking fire damage. And if you get swallowed by it, you take acid damage from its digestive juices, and you also take fire damage from the internal heat of the monster. That's what we mean by the remoras having a hot body. And the white dragon, which is probably the most powerful, if you ever have the misfortune to run into an ancient white dragon, is probably the most powerful of the enemies you would face in an Arctic environment like that. So frost giants are an enemy that combines real combat opportunities with some possibilities of recurring non-fatal encounters. So perhaps maybe the first time you meet a settlement of frost giants, your party is already powerful enough that they can get the better of them. Maybe they manage to kill or knock out the champion or the Jarl of this group of frost giants. Okay, as we said, they respect strength, so everybody else is going to kind of take a step back, and the party then might be able to sort of not really make an alliance, but sort of get these frost giants in a position where the party can bully them into cooperating or providing occasional information or occasional hospitality. So there might even be an opportunity for an enemy of my enemy mini adventure arc where the PCs and the Frost Giants discover there's a common foe that threatens both of their settlements and both of their lives. And so they actually kind of have this, yeah, I don't really trust you, but you're not as bad as that other enemy over there, so why don't we gang up and fight that thing? So, because giants have their own language and their own civilization and things like that, there's that sort of opportunity for maybe not necessarily cooperation, but finding a mutual interest in order to go after something that they hate. All right, and now we'll take a look at how we might reskin the monster. Giants are already in this really interesting and weird paradigm where it feels like back in the early days of the game, they almost had the idea that giants might be some sort of elemental monster. Because they're very strangely aligned with the elemental planes. If you think about it, you have the stone giants, which have almost some qualities of creatures from the elemental plane of Earth. And then you have the cloud giants, which kind of have some little qualities with creatures from the elemental plane of air. You've got the frost giants, which share kind of some qualities from the creatures from the elemental plane of water. And you have the fire giants, which kind of share some qualities with the creatures from the elemental plane of fire. And in 5th edition, those are all at different challenge ratings. So there's this whole array of giants, and you can have a nice long adventure arc or even a complete campaign like the old early edition Against the Giants campaign or the 5th edition Storm King's Thunder campaign, where the whole of the time you are dealing with attacks by or negotiations with or your dealings with giants of different varieties all throughout the entire campaign. So an easy way to reskin giants, if you want to introduce them at different levels, is just to look at the existing giants and then flip-flop the CR and some of the armor class and hit points and things like that between the existing forms. So you have a lower level party and they're in an Arctic area. Well, go ahead and just take the stat block of, let's say, a hill giant and give it the qualities of frost giant. And so now you have a frost giant that's a little bit weaker. Conversely, you get a higher level party and they're somewhere in the foothills of something and they need something that's more challenging than hill giants. Well, take the frost giant stat block and swap out a couple of things from the hill giant and make the hill giants as beefy and as tough and hitting as hard as the frost giants do. So several published 5e adventures frost giants have taken on undead templates like the skeleton zombies. Another way you can think about reskinning giants is think about other templates you might apply to frost giants to create something brand new for your game. So let's imagine, what would a frost giant construct be like? Take the basic stat block, but then give it the properties of a construct. Who would build such a construct? What would the purpose of such a construct be? And then understanding who would build it and what the purpose would be, how would it then fight? Would it fight with weapons? Would it have, some sort of built-in weaponry or things like that it would fight with? Then what about a frost giant stat block that has the properties of a plant monster? So maybe it's like this insane frozen vine monster that lives in the Arctic, in Arctic forests or something like that. Um, so you could have the basic frost giant template, but you could give it the qualities of plant monsters. Or what about an aberration, a frost giant from the from the great beyond, from the far realms. So maybe it has some sort of weird head tentacles on it, or it has some kind of strange mind affecting powers or something that are reminiscent of some of the higher level aberrations out there. Or maybe even you have an ooze, a frost giant ooze monster. So it's got the stat block of a frost giant. It fights with the same number of attacks and kind of damage, but it's an ooze, and it does things that oozes do. So maybe it has the ability to be in air quotes frozen in a frozen form, but then it can flow and move around like an ooze moves. But then it also might, if it attacks somebody else, it might start putting ice crystals on something when it attacks, and it might start freezing and turning enemies that it comes into contact with into more of these sort of frost giant ooze monster things. So there's a lot of different things that you can think about doing with a basic stat block if you want to bring that in. Hey, Gift Gabby. Yeah. Yeah, Amish, that is an image of the Frost Giant Everlasting one. It is a variant of the Frost Giant, multi-headed variant from 5th edition, and I believe it's out of Volo's Guide to Monsters is where we find that lovely creature. All right, let's see. Okay, it's time for the Q&A, so I'm going to go over here. I don't see any questions right now, so I'm going to go on into the wrap-up, and then I'm going to come back and look at the chat once again and see if you guys do have any questions on Frost Giants that we can talk about before we get out of here. Alright, I have been DM Gallibond, and this has been Monster Monday. Thank you guys for joining me to take a look at the history of this monster and think about different ways we might use it in our campaigns. I have 3 ongoing campaigns that I run every week that you can find on Twitch and on YouTube. Archives are, as always, on the YouTube channel. Sunday afternoons at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we have the Walker of Waterdeep. Then Thursday afternoons Thursday evenings at 8 p.m. we have the Sword Coast Chronicles. Walker of Waterdeep is a 5th edition planeswalking campaign where we cross the streams between Magic the Gathering and 5th edition D&D. Sword Coast Chronicles, we are telling a homebrew story, but we're doing so through the lens of the 5th edition campaigns, and it just so happens that we are actually in the storyline of Storm King's Thunder. We're not dealing with Frost Giants right now, but we are in that storyline in Sword Coast Chronicles, so if you want to see what that's like, you can join us on Thursdays. And then on Saturday nights at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, we get in a Wayback Machine and we throw back to 2nd edition, Saturday Night Greyhawk. We play a campaign with 2nd edition rules, and right now we are going through the original Temple of Elemental Evil adventure with 2nd edition rules. So that is quite a fun adventure, and the players are all having a great time with that. It's one of the classics, and they've kind of asked, and I have accepted the challenge, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We're turning that Saturday night campaign into sort of a greatest hits, And my idea is to string together with appropriate levels, running them through some of the classic campaign adventures from the old editions of D&D, and having all of those be played through second edition rules, so they can level their characters all the way up as they go through some of these classic adventures. A lot of people in that game have been playing for decades, and most of them have never had a chance to play some of these iconic adventures. So we're having a lot of fun, and there's a bit of nostalgia, and we laugh at some of the descriptions that are in there that are good old Gary Gygax descriptions, admonishments to the players about, you better not do this, or you're certainly going to be sorry if you do that. And those types of things. So you can find all of those live streams simulcast on Twitch and YouTube. Archives always on YouTube. Now next week, I mentioned something before, so I'm going to go back to that particular view over here. I mentioned that we were going to look at this last tab here. Tomorrow we drop, or Wizards of the Coast, I should say, drops the Strixhaven, a Curriculum of Chaos. It is the brand new source book for D&D 5e, and it is another one of the source books that comes out of a setting from Magic the Gathering. What I am going to do, I actually have a day off on this Friday. So my plan is on Friday evening, it'll be Friday the 10th, I am going to do a live stream and give you guys my first impressions of Strixhaven. So I'll go through, give you a little bit of a synopsis of what is in there, talk about some of the elements of the book I really like, and that will include taking a look at some of the new monsters that are in there and some of the new magic items. And then next Monday, on Monster Monday, we are going to profile a monster out of Strixhaven. I don't know what that monster is because, as you can see, I've already ordered it, but it's not available to look at until tomorrow. So I haven't seen what's in there. So I'll take some time to look at it, and then I will probably pick out and announce on Friday during that live stream. I'll announce which monster I am going to be profiling next Monday night. So if you want to join us for a live stream, you can do that. All right, now let me go back over here and let me look. Okay, I don't see any pictures, or I don't see any questions, I should say, on the Frost Giant. So I am going to go ahead and toss us into the end credits, and I'm going to look for a stream that we can raid. I'll turn the music up, and keep in mind the incidental music we've had tonight is from Syrinscape. Syrinscape is a desktop app. I've started using it with all of my games. I really like it over any other resource I have found for a couple of reasons. Number one, it has built-in connectivity with your Discord, so that without having to add a bunch of third-party software or do a whole bunch of weird, load up a whole bunch of other weird things, virtual cables and all that kind of crap, you can run Syrinscape and Discord on your computer, and you can stream Syrinscape for your players and for the viewers of your live stream. So it's got the beauty of doing that is that by going through and having it as a stream on Discord, the players then have individual control of how loud or how soft they want that in case the music in the background is distracting for them. And you can then also have with Sirenscape like the soundboard like during your battles, and there's always like these little hits you can do, like you can do a scream, or you can do a sword strike, or you can do stuff along with the chaos in the background of the general battle furor and the battle music that they have. So it's really kind of a very cool application, and I'm enjoying it a lot, and I think my players are liking it too. So you can pop in for our live streams and let us know what you think about the Sirenscape and soundscapes that we're able to create in our games with it. Alright, now we'll go ahead and take a look at Twitch, and we're going to see alright, Dungeons and Dragons. Who is... Okay. Alright, it looks like... Okay, the... Alright, let's go ahead and raid Drydane. We'll raid Drydane. Looks like he's doing some D&D. So raid. Alright. Well, hope you guys have enjoyed our look at Frost Giants tonight. Hope you all will take care, have a wonderful evening, and as always, remember to watch out for the monsters under the bed. Good night, everybody.